Racial history in the United States has often been a story of taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But when it comes to the history of Black people in the United States, you could honestly say that it's really been 1 step forward and 2 steps back. African Americans have been taken advantage of, marginalized, disenfranchised, ostracized, and villainized for the entire history of the nation. Even now, despite the progress that has been made through years and years of fighting for civil rights, the U.S. government is trying to undo that progress slowly but surely. African Americans may not be slaves anymore, but that is not stopping the U.S. government at every turn from trying to make their lives a living hell. As much as I tend to be optimistic about things, Trump leaving office will not fix all of the country's problems. He is far from the only president that has used his power to negatively affect the lives of African Americans. And I'm going to take you through that entire history, starting from the founding of the nation up until now. And when I am done, you will find a common story. Black people make progress, and the takers come and try to undo that progress. This is Hidden History. This is the story of the takers. From the moment the Declaration of Independence was sent to Britain in 1776, the United States has been breaking its promises to African Americans. Back in those days, they weren't even African Americans. They were just slaves. But in a move to bolster their effort to gain independence in the Revolutionary War, the Continental Army offered slaves freedom if they served. Of course, many black men took on the opportunity, but when everything was said and done, only a few of those that had served actually got their independence. And when the United States officially created their country, Black people were not even considered human, and so those that served were forced back into the chains of slave labor. Even the abolition of slavery was almost a broken promise. The Emancipation Proclamation was passed in 1863. But slaves did not find out they were freed until 1865, after the Union had already won the Civil War. If the Confederacy had have won the Civil War, slaves would have never found out that they were freed, and that would have changed the course of history in America forever. The post-slavery era in the United States defined 1 step forward, 2 steps back more than any other era. Even after slaves were finally freed, they had little to no wealth to fall back on, and so to earn income, they continued working on the exact same plantations where they were slaves just years before. The United States government did step in to help Black people get on their feet, with organizations like the Freedmen's Bureau setting up banks for Black people to invest. But after the Freedmen's Bank headquarters moved to Washington, D.C., white politicians and businessmen took over the bank and used the funds inside it to support shady deals and risky ventures, having no respect for the people who placed their livelihoods in the Freedmen's Bank. And the bank was eventually shut down in 1874. The Freedmen's Bureau also gave former slaves land so that they could grow crops and build their own communities. But after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, the decree of 40 acres and a mule was reversed, and the land was given back to the white plantation owners where the land had been taken from. In spite of all this, Black Americans still managed to build their own communities, and at one point or another, many of them were thriving, with educated men and women alike coming together to build sprawling communities. Black people were doctors, teachers, professors, blacksmiths, and skilled trades were to be found everywhere. But in one way or another, these Black communities were snuffed out or outright destroyed. The Tulsa Massacre in Oklahoma has the spotlight as the worst of the examples of Black cities being destroyed. But something you might not understand is that Tulsa wasn't even a majority Black city. Only 10% of the population was African American, but the majority of them lived in a district called Greenwood, and it was there that Black businesses, churches, libraries, and hospitals were built. At the same time as the Greenwood district was thriving, the Ku Klux Klan was growing in the United States, and many, if not all, of the rest of the population of Tulsa supported them. Lynchings happened frequently in the city, and there was almost another one in the case that would lead to the Tulsa race riots. Dick Rowland, an American shoe shiner, accidentally stepped on the foot of Sarah Page, a white woman, in an elevator. Her exclamation of pain was completely overblown when the city's newspaper reported that he had attempted to rape her, and an angry white mob soon mobilized. The black residents of Tulsa, hearing of this uprising, armed themselves to defend their families and neighborhoods. Tensions flared, a shot was fired, and that was when all hell broke loose. The police, who were supposed to protect the citizens of the city, actually aided the white mobbers, telling them to, quote, "get a gun and get a nigger." The angry white mob flooded into the Greenwood district, looting homes and burning everything they could see to the ground. Survivors of the attack also maintained that planes were used and bombs were dropped on the Greenwood district. The worst part of it all is that in the aftermath, no white person was ever charged or brought to jail for the crimes that were committed that day. Although Tulsa, Oklahoma is the most famous of black communities that has been destroyed, it is not the first. Seneca Village was a thriving black town in the 1850s when slavery was still legal, but the New York state government used eminent domain to seize the land this community was on to make room for the construction of Central Park. Nicodemus, Kansas was founded in 1877, but the town was completely cut off from the railroad system, and so it eventually declined. Oscarville, Georgia was another thriving black town, but the residents of that town were driven out, and the remains were buried under Lake Lanier. Time and time again, when black people were going to make progress, that progress was destroyed or pushed back. And it didn't just stop at this. Even if those towns had been left standing, that did not mean they lived in the best environment. Immediately after the abolition of slavery, and after Abraham Lincoln's assassination, the Jim Crow laws were put in place. If black people weren't slaves anymore, then the federal and state governments were going to make their lives as hellish as possible. Meaningful progress would not be made to stop these atrocities until the civil rights movement of the 1960s. One of the biggest victories of the civil rights movement was the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But in reality, African Americans had had the right to vote since 1870 with the ratification of the 15th Amendment. But the Jim Crow South made it basically impossible for any black voter to ever have a hope of using his vote. During the early days of Jim Crow, state governments used the grandfather clause, which dictated that your father's father had to have voted for you to have the right to vote. Of course, newly freed slaves wouldn't have that luxury because going back 2 generations puts their grandfathers back in slavery, so black men still couldn't vote. Once women's suffrage was achieved, both black men and women inherited an evolved version of the same problem. As recently as the 1950s, states like Mississippi used voter literacy tests, full of questions literally designed to confuse, and if they did not get every single question right, they could not vote. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 finally did away with all these petty hindrances, and black people were finally able to vote. Even as black people were racking up victories during the civil rights movement, there were still rights kept away from them. Black people were not allowed to give FHA loans if they were first-time home buyers. Even as the civil rights movement carried on, this law did not change until after the assassination of Martin Luther King. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Once black people were finally given access to FHA loans, the credit system was created. So now an extra metric was needed to get into certain homes, and most black people were unable to meet that metric, therefore upholding segregation without technically being segregated. And now we move to the modern times. Donald Trump is trying to remove African American influence from the country in every way he can. Police are attacking black people left and right with no cause whatsoever and with absolutely no recourse. Trump has talked about making U.S. citizenship no longer a birthright. On the surface, this affects the immigrants that he pledged to get out of the country. But who does this also affect? Do you think Donald Trump cares about the difference between a Haitian immigrant and a black person born in America? In his eyes, they're all the same. All this while still in his first year in office. And if Trump is allowed to continue to get his way, he will make it his mission to undo all of the progress made over hundreds of years of history. But it's important that this history is known. If there is a person in your life that thinks what's happening right now is an isolated incident, show them this video. Knowing our past and accepting our past helps us move forward and prevent the same things from happening in the future. And if we all work together, we can move forward, step by step. This has been Hidden History. Thank you for watching.